Hello everyone, this is Warhawk Beyond 2040 and welcome to another edition of the Batwoman Season 3 review series. And today I am going to be talking about episode 3, Freeze, which I have just finished watching. And this episode was alright. Not terrible, not great, but alright. There were some aspects of this episode that I enjoyed, but there were some aspects of this episode that I wouldn't say I didn't enjoy. I just didn't really care for that much. And I wouldn't say this episode was as strong as the first two, but as I said, this episode was alright. It won't go down as one of my favourites, but having said that, we're only 3 episodes into season 3 so far, so who knows? Maybe the next episode might be better. But this episode, even though he didn't actually physically appear in this episode was very Mr. Freeze prominent throughout. And we saw the Arrowverse debut of Nora Freeze, who has been mentioned a couple of times in the Arrowverse, so we got to actually see her, but as an old lady living her life after being cured from her disease. And as I said, this episode was alright. Wasn't the greatest, but it certainly wasn't the worst. This will probably go down as very average, but slightly below, in my opinion. And once again, the only person who, as always, steals the show in every scene she's in is, of course, Rachel Scarsden as Alice, who, for me, is the only person who's keeping the interest going in this show, in my opinion. So, with that all said, let's get straight into it. Let's talk about episode 3, Freeze. So, this episode starts off with a canister of liquid nitrogen from Mr. Freeze, who has been mentioned that has actually died and doesn't exist in the Arrowverse, so he's actually dead in this universe. He makes headlines after it ends up in the hands of a couple of school children and it freezes a school bus. Alice complains about the tracking nanobots that the Bat Team injected with her back at the end of episode 2, but reluctantly agrees to help track down Mr. Freeze's canisters. Meanwhile, a group of criminals confronts Nora Freeze, who has aged drastically into an old woman due to her disease and being frozen for so long, after she was no longer cryogenically frozen in Victor Freeze's liquid nitrogen, and who lives with her sister Dee. Nora and Dee are both held hostage and taken to, you guessed it, Ace Chemicals, where they are forced to unveil the company's secret of cryogenics, and Batwoman shows up and rescues Nora, but ultimately gets beaten down by the criminals and thrown into the Ace Chemical plant's unstable cryogenic chamber. As she slowly starts to freeze to death, Batwoman convinces Luke to suit up as Batwing once again, while Sophie coaches her through the hypothermia, partially by confronting her about how she handled the whole Jada situation. Now, at the end of episode 2, Ryan Wilder confronted Jada and revealed that she is her daughter, which didn't go down very well, and her mother, Jada, pretty much told her to get lost. So that's kind of carried on from the end of episode 2 and continued into episode 3. So that was kind of like dealing with the aftermath of being told that her own mother doesn't want to know her. We then see Batwing shows up and rescues her as they drive the Batmobile after the criminals who have kidnapped Dee. After the criminals destroy parts of the Gotham Bridge, Batwing uses the flight powers in his suit to freeze the bridge, allowing Batwoman to cross over. Meanwhile, Ryan meets with Jada again and asks her why she covered up her birth. Jada pushes her off and refuses to have a relationship with her. Ryan is then introduced to Marcus, Jada's son. Marcus later meets with Ryan and reveals that he guessed she was his sister and that she was the product of an affair that Jada tried to cover up many years ago. He also suggests that the two of them work together behind Jada's back, but Ryan eventually turns down his offer not wanting anything to do with Jada and her connections and putting the team first. Good on her. Alice confronts Mary about the way she's been treated, Luke's PTSD, and argues that Mary doesn't realize how insignificant she is on the Bat team. Now, this scene here was just classic Alice, driving the wedge deeper and deeper, playing on Mary's insecurities. And, in some points, Mary is kind of the weak link, but that doesn't mean she's completely useless. She may not be a fighter like the others, but she's a valuable asset to the team. And, having the doctor to treat all those wounds and know all about different conditions and things like that, I think is very important. So Alice has just been Alice, and Rachel Scars, and anytime she's on screen, always makes for great TV. Later, as Mary treats Nora in the hospital, Alice threatens to kill Nora if Mary doesn't remove the nanobots from her, but Nora doesn't care if she dies. Later, Alice gets sent back to Arkham and begins to hallucinate the nanobots physically attacking her. Later, Mary tells Ryan about Luke disabling the failsafe in the suit, but Luke is adamant that he's okay to go out in the field. And Mary says, I had no choice but to tell Ryan, and I had to say something. And Luke says, no, you didn't, and it just storms off. Now, Mary and Luke have kind of had this thing going on for about a couple of seasons now, although nothing has actually happened with them two. They've been growing more closer and they've teased flirtatious things here and there, so who knows, maybe they might finally pull the trigger and put the two of them together, but we'll see really. Mary meets with Nora and Dee in the park and confirms that the police will not be chasing after her anymore and Batwoman has taken care of everything, and Nora agrees that she wants to live her final days while she still can. And just afterwards, we see Mary starts to walk away and she is pulled in by one of Poison Ivy's vines and pulled into the woods. And that is how we end episode 3. And that wraps up my review. Like I said before, this episode was alright. Not great, but not terrible. Just alright. Nothing special here. But our first hint at Poison Ivy definitely got me excited. And I'm curious to see how they're going to actually introduce Poison Ivy because, as I said at the beginning, it looks like Poison Ivy is going to be the main villain, which, quite frankly, I'm probably more interested to see than the Mad Hatter. Although the Mad Hatter is a fun character, I just like to see some more love for Poison Ivy because she doesn't really have that much going for her at the moment. I mean, she's a big mainstay in the comics and, of course, in the DCAU, but we very rarely have seen much of her in the Arrowverse, so I'm looking forward to seeing that. So that's going to be it from me. I am going to wrap this up now. What did you think of episode 3? Did you enjoy it? What was your thoughts on Poison Ivy potentially abducting Mary? Do you think Poison Ivy has something up her sleeve? And also, do you think Mary did the right thing informing the team about Luke's failsafe in her suit? And also, what about Alice? Why do you think she's hallucinating? And also, do you think deep down there is any redemption for Alice whatsoever? And also, what did you think of Mr. Freeze being used as the catalyst for this episode, even though he physically didn't appear? Do you think Mr. Freeze should have appeared? And what is your thoughts on Mr. Freeze being dead in the Arrowverse? Do you think they should keep him alive? And also, what about Nora Freeze being alive but as an old lady? Do you think that's an interesting twist? And do you think they did a good job telling that story with her? You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below. And I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Batwoman Season 3 review series, where I am going to be talking about episode 4, which I'm hoping is going to be a lot better than this one, but time will tell really. But if Poison Ivy is going to be in the next episode, or we're going to get hints of her, then count me in. So until next time, take care everybody and stay safe, and once again, thanks for listening.